Thank you so much, Ma. Thank you so much, Lily, for moderating the session. Okay, just a little announcement. There's a car outside GT8535, plate number. You need it outside by the security. That was a wonderful section, and we're moving over to the next section. And the next section for starting now is his moderator is Mr. Poncelet, Ileleji. He is a computer scientist by profession with over plus 25 years in the field, and he's currently the CEO of Joko Labs, Banjul, in Gambia, and he served as a consultant for several projects in Africa, covering ICT for learning, technology, and education. And he also does stuff in regarding to internet governance and health. Mr. Poncelet, thank you so much for calling our invitation.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to this session on digital inclusion and access. I will now call on my panelists for this session. First, I will call on Eleanor Sarpong from the A4AI. She is the Deputy Director and Policy Lead for the Affordable Internet for All. I'll later call on my brother, Dr. Inoussa TRAORE. He's the focal point for internet governance in Burkina Faso, and also the Secretary General of the National Agency for Development on Information Communication Technologies in Burkina Faso. And we have online Gbenga Sesan, the Executive Director of Paradigm Initiative based in Nigeria. Thank you. We just finished a very interesting session with our parliamentarians, and I think without much ado, it's been been the highlight of these two-day events, because one thing you will look at when you hear from your parliamentarians, they are the real grassroots politicians talking, and for them to understand the issues that we face as citizens in our respective countries in West Africa and in Africa in general, you'll be very happy that at least our parliamentarians know what they're talking about. And it leads, that discussion on data innovation and privacy leads into this discussion on digital inclusion and access. If you look at what is happening since the COVID took place, you'll discover that digital inclusion has been one of the biggest take we have had, in the sense that we have seen a lot of our vulnerable people in the continent and even in West Africa that have not really been able to be digitally included, and this also relates to access. The document on the United Nations Secretary General Digital Roadmap Digital Cooperation Roadmap says that 93% of the world population is near access to mobile broadband, at least, but only 56% don't have that access, over 3-point-something billion of the world population, and we can relate it to what we have here. Eleanor deals with affordable internet, and I think digital inclusion and access is a big part of it. I would like us to let us profile solutions instead of looking at what happens. So this discussion will be, what solutions can we do for West Africa? So I will start with Eleanor now. Thank you.
Thank you, Poncelet, and thank you so much for having us. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the audience. So I just want to start by taking a step back on digital inclusion and access. And one of the things that strikes me is that there are a lot of people within coverage area, as you mentioned. But what kind of quality of access do they have? And the reason why I wanted to stress on the point of access is that we need to start looking at meaningful access. And meaningful access is that ability to be able to connect with at least a 4G type speed, with an entry-level smartphone, having unlimited data, and also being able to connect daily. And we came up with a theory that you have, under meaningful access, you should have meaningful connectivity. You should have affordable access, that you shouldn't spend more than 2% of your average monthly income on 1 gigabit of data. And you know that within the, here, just even streaming a Zoom call takes more than 1 gig of data. So people are spending up to sometimes 21%. That's of the average monthly income on 1 gigabit of data. So that makes that it's not affordable. We also need to look at some of the social factors that support meaningful connectivity, digital skills, trust. We just had a session about data protection and privacy. These are all elements that are needed in order to make sure that people are meaningfully connected and can use the internet in a meaningful way. So now that we understand all these issues and the descriptions that I've given, what kind of solutions should we be looking at in order to ensure that people can have meaningful access? One of the key things is to look at infrastructure. We do not have enough infrastructure across the continent, and especially in West Africa. We find out that in urban areas, sometimes you have duplicates of infrastructure. The same, if you go across from just outside the hotel, you have, Vodafone has laid a cable, MTN has laid a cable, but then you go just to a few areas just out on the outskirts, even peri-urban areas, or even within the capital itself, there are pockets of areas that do not have connectivity, good connectivity, because they don't have the right infrastructure. So we need to have an evenly distributed infrastructure. We need to have equity in the way broadband infrastructure or internet infrastructure is delivered across the country. We also need to look at how the kind of policies that are in place to make sure that there's investments within the internet space. Because if you leave it to companies alone, they are just going to go to places where they can make money. And so that means that they'll look at places where people can afford, which is mainly in urban areas or in places where they know that there is high net individuals. But what we need to start thinking and mandating companies to do is to either incentivize them or use obligations in your license to say that, look, if we are giving you this spectrum or this license, you need to make sure you cover all these areas with the same type of speed and internet quality that you will give to other areas which are very rich. The other thing that I think the regulators also need to look at is the way they give the licenses as well, and give a lot more opportunity to smaller players within the ecosystem. We continue to look at a lot of the big companies, but sometimes you need to start looking at small community-owned companies like community networks, for instance. And they can go to places where people are not interested, or are smaller communities, villages. They are more interested in going there. And communities have been able to raise money to have their own network, which sometimes it costs just about $15,000 to put up, but it's enough to connect about 25 households. And we've seen that with Zenzeleni in South Africa. So I think that there are innovative ways to do that through, there's a role for regulators to play. We need to have equity in the distribution of infrastructure. We need to invite new players, and we also need to make sure we mandate operators to start going to places that they're not interested in. The other thing I think we should be looking at is universal service funds, but I'll pause for now just because I think that's a whole different area that we can look at.
Thank you very much. I think it's also good what Eleanor emphasized on meaningful connectivity. and the various scenarios she gave, especially when you look at cables and infrastructure in peri-urban areas and rural areas. There's a lot. Most of our telcos, most of our ISPs have been very much profits-oriented instead of looking at the inclusivity of the whole community. The Internet Society does a lot on community networks, and we have Elliot here from the Internet Society. Yes, so I would like to hear a perspective on, in terms of within local context, especially here in Ghana, what they are doing in terms of digital inclusion and access. Mod, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Ashong Elliot, Vice President, Internet Society Ghana Chapter. And as our mission or our motto, the internet is for everyone. Hence, the idea to make sure that we connect everyone is the game. One thing you have mentioned is community networks. And it's one method that we are able to use to make sure that even those in the interlands are able to connect with themselves. We've had projects, especially in the north, where we had to use Raspberry Pi, to create some form of communication among the people. The villages are not really close. They are really interspersed. So we use Raspberry Pi in connection with their central communication system to send out communique to let them know what is going on. And the few ones that are also connected, who have smartphones, are able to connect with each other. See, that's one form of it. Another thing we also do as Internet Society is also to be involved in terms of policy-wise, knowing that, we work with A4AI to talk about affordability. We also push for accessibility and also for security to make sure that those who are even online trust the internet. And one interesting thing is that we are interested in the future of the internet. So the Internet Society, especially here, those of us here in Ghana and that's in West Africa, I guess we are pushing to make sure that we bridge that digital divide. Thank you.
Thank you, Maud, for that, what you're doing. I know the Internet Society, I'm sure you might talk about it. The Global Internet Society, Ghana is on one of their new projects coming up, Ghana and Indonesia, and it will be good to hear how that will impact access and digital inclusion. I will now move to my good friend, Dr. Inoussa TRAORE, the academic here. What you are doing in Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is unique. I think we are having the first landlocked country in West Africa speaking in this national IGF. They are landlocked. They have their own, they don't have direct access to a submarine cable, so they have to meander. We all know what is happening. They are one of the countries that have been hit badly by terrorists, whether it's Al-Qaeda in the Sahel or Qam, and a lot of the northern part of Burkina Faso. You can imagine what those people have gone through. So from your perspective, sir, what is the data inclusivity nature in Burkina Faso? How will you look at it from the perspective in terms of access, being a landlocked country, in terms of cost and everything? Over to you.
Thanks, Poncelet. Je vais devoir obliger les gens à porter les casques parce que je vais parler en français. Ça peut aller. D'accord. Merci, Poncelet. Je suis Inoussa TRAORE. Patienter. Ok. Ok. Donc, je suis enseignant-chercheur à l'université Ouaga et aussi le directeur général de l'Agence nationale de développement des TIC au Burkina Faso, qui est une agence publique gouvernementale chargée de gérer tout ce qui est l'infrastructure numérique au service de l'administration publique au Burkina Faso. Donc, comme le disait tout à l'heure Poncelet, le Burkina est un pays qui n'a pas accès directement à la mer. Donc, quand on parle d'inclusion numérique, déjà à l'échelle du pays, il y a un premier handicap et on doit développer des initiatives pour pouvoir justement contourner ce handicap-là. Donc, dans ce sens-là, le Burkina a mis en place un certain nombre de projets ambitieux pour garantir le développement de l'infrastructure numérique nécessaire pour permettre aux populations d'accéder aux services. Parce que l'inclusion numérique s'entend dans la perspective où les populations, où le maximum de populations a accès aux différents services numériques qui sont développés et disponibles. Donc la question de l'infrastructure est gérée au Burkina Faso à travers, par exemple, pour la connectivité, on a mis en place ce qu'on appelle des points d'atterrissement virtuels qui permettent justement à tous les fournisseurs d'accès Internet, les opérateurs y compris, de pouvoir mutualiser et prendre la capacité nécessaire pour pouvoir offrir les services digitaux aux populations. Également, on a mis en place les points d'échange Internet et l'un des aspects sur lesquels le Burkina a beaucoup progressé ces dernières années, c'est la mise en place de ce qu'on appelle le backbone national des télécommunications, ce qui a permis de mailler pratiquement tout le territoire, en fait, les grandes villes du pays par la fibre optique, donc qui permet l'accessibilité géographique, j'allais dire, à un certain nombre de services. Donc, mais la question de l'inclusion va au-delà de cette accessibilité géographique, parce qu'il y a la question de l'accessibilité financière. Donc, le coût des services qui sont offerts, ça reste relativement élevé. Et cela s'explique aussi par le fait que le transport, la connectivité depuis les câbles sous-marins jusqu'au pays, il y a des coûts additionnels qui s'ajoutent. Voilà. Donc, cela fait que la question de l'accessibilité financière demeure encore un défi. Et aujourd'hui, il y a d'autres facteurs qui ont émergé, qui sont des défis en matière d'inclusion numérique. Tout à l'heure, Poncelet parlait de la question de la sécurité. Aujourd'hui, on a des problèmes sécuritaires qui ont entraîné des déplacements massifs de populations, donc qui sont des déplacés internes. Donc, aujourd'hui, nous menons la réflexion pour voir comment est-ce que ces personnes peuvent être incluses dans l'offre de services numériques. Donc, comment assurer justement la couverture en connectivité de ces camps de déplacés qui sont coupés par moment des services publics. Par exemple, je vous donne un exemple simple, les services d'accès à tout ce qui est justice. Il y a des villes où les palais de justice, les magistrats ont dû partir parce que la zone n'est plus sécurisée. Donc, quand des gens ont besoin d'accéder à des services comme un certificat de nationalité ou un casier judiciaire, ça devient la croix et la bannière. Donc, aujourd'hui, l'idée, c'est de voir comment on développe la couche supplémentaire des services. Voilà, au-delà de l'infrastructure, quels sont les services numériques et publics que l'on peut mettre en œuvre pour permettre justement à ces populations de pouvoir accéder à des services, surtout des services de l'administration, mais également des services en lien avec, par exemple, l'accès aux finances. Donc, beaucoup de défis, et nous voyons plutôt le numérique aujourd'hui comme une solution, une opportunité pour garantir l'inclusion à plusieurs niveaux, que ce soit l'accès à des services sociaux, que ce soit l'accès aux finances. Aujourd'hui, avec la bonne couverture du territoire, avec le réseau et le développement remarquable des services financiers numériques, il il y a les opérations de transfert, par exemple, d'argent sont de plus en plus facilitées et cela permet de régler pas mal de problèmes aux populations qui ont des problèmes liés à l'accès à ces services-là. Donc, ce que nous essayons de faire au niveau de l'Agence nationale de promotion d'éthique, c'est travailler chaque année à élargir le réseau de l'administration pour permettre à l'ensemble des administrations décentralisées et déconcentrées de pouvoir être connectées au réseau national et permettre aux citoyens de pouvoir accéder aux services publics en ligne. Donc, ça, c'est notre objectif principal et tous nos efforts sont mis en œuvre pour pouvoir atteindre cet objectif-là. Après, il appartient aux autres acteurs de développer les couches supplémentaires en termes de services. Voilà, donc les ministères sectoriels, les privés essaient de développer des services, mais il faut que l'infrastructure aille jusqu'au dernier kilomètre pour permettre justement au plus grand nombre d'accéder à ces services-là. Actuellement, il y a des projets qui sont en cours pour pouvoir justement accompagner le développement de ces services-là, mais en lien avec l'entrepreneuriat numérique. L'idée, c'est que des jeunes qui font des startups puissent développer des services et accompagner les populations à pouvoir accéder à ces services-là dans le cadre de leur business modèle qu'ils mettent en œuvre. Donc, voilà un peu la perspective dans laquelle on se situe en termes d'inclusion numérique. Donc, on met l'effort sur l'infrastructure et on essaie aussi de développer l'entrepreneuriat numérique et on accompagne par le développement aussi des compétences numériques parce que s'il n'y a pas de compétences numériques, s'il n'y a pas de l'alphabétisation numérique, s'il n'y a pas de gens qui développent des services pour pouvoir briser ces barrières qui sont liées justement aux questions d'éducation ou aux questions d'alphabétisation, cela peut être problématique. Donc pour le moment, voilà ce que je peux dire. Merci, Poncelet.
Thank you very much, Dr. Inoussa TRAORE. I think I will come back to you again on when you talked about those vulnerable population, and that's what I would like to focus on in digital inclusion. What has been done to those internally displaced people that they have been able to benefit in terms of digital skills, in terms of access, because what is happening in Burkina Faso is not only unique to Burkina Faso, it's in Niger, it's in Mali, it's in Nigeria. So maybe your model you have used to deal with to making your vulnerable population access certain digital digital skills might be helpful in terms of access and in terms of inclusion. What do they benefit? Because they're in a confined space, and I think if you have any statistical numbers from your agency, that would be good. I'll now move over to Mr. Gbenga Sesan. I don't know if he's online. Is he online? From Paradigm Initiative.
Yes.
To hear his perspective and what Paradigm Initiative has been doing in terms of digital inclusion and access. Is Mr. Gbenga Sesan online? Okay, here you go. Over to you,
yes,
Gbenga.
and I hope you can hear me. Good. Thank you so much, Poncelet. I mean, it's interesting that we're discussing digital inclusion, which is what brought me to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I've had a lot of challenges staying connected on a call to discuss digital inclusion. But I think it speaks very well to the topic that we're discussing today in terms of what obtains across many African countries. At Paradigm Initiative, we work across the region, and something that we've seen that is very clear is that we need definitely to talk a lot more about inclusion, and not just to talk about it, but to take action. Much of our work is around digital rights. And interesting enough, you cannot begin to emphasize, the issue of rights, even when people are not connected, because the truth is, if I'm not connected to the internet, I am not going to consider things around, things that are supposed to be like my rights and things as priority. But definitely, rights are important. And in fact, inclusion in itself is the right. Two quick things, for me in terms of what we are doing and what I consider the next steps in terms of inclusion for us on the continent, as we discussed, at this important forum. We just released our 2021 Digital Rights and Inclusion in Africa report called LONDA, and it features 22 African countries. And one thread that goes through the entire report that you will find is that many African countries have refused to learn lessons from COVID lockdowns. During the COVID lockdowns and all through the period, and even until now, because we're still fighting with the pandemic, many countries literally, during the lockdowns, for example, had to go online to learn, for schooling, for, to go to work, you have to be online. To connect with your family, you have to be online. And I believe, and as we believe as an organization, that should have been an opportunity for us as a continent to understand the place of inclusion, the place of access a lot more. But it appears that we haven't learned the lessons. Interesting enough, many of the emergency laws that many governments across the continent put in place during COVID that allowed them to gain more control over data and even sort of regulate many things are still in place. But the things that we should learn from around access and inclusion are not in place. And that leads me to a central point that we need to make across many of our countries. I'm Nigerian, it applies to Nigeria. We're in Ghana today, it applies to Ghana. Physical in DRC today applies to DRC. Many of our countries have universal services funds. And at Paradigm Initiative, we've made it a point of duty to talk about this all the time and to say that it's great to have many of the telecom companies, many of the platforms come to our countries to provide temporary access, but we need to demand from government to utilize the universal services funds. In many countries, it ranges from 0.5 to 3, in some places 5% of profit after tax from telecom companies. And this pool of funds is being used by many countries for the wrong things. Meanwhile, they should be used to encourage telecom companies to go to the hinterland and not to stay in cities, which is why we don't have a lot of good access. Cables have landed in almost all of the capitals that are along the coast. In fact, all the capitals along the coast have cables, but we don't have inland access because of this reason. So I think if there's one thing that I want to emphasize today, it's the fact that as civil society, as private sector, as government, we all need to put our feet on the ground and say to government, it is high time to utilize the Universal Services Fund. Apologies for the for the plane flying over, but clearly this is one area where our government have shared their responsibilities. The funds are there, and we have many reports from many organizations showing the sizes of many of those funds. Many of them are in millions of dollars. Many of them in hundreds of millions of dollars. Unfortunately, many of them are susceptible to corruption. But we need to insist that governments must utilize universal services funds to do what it's being collected for, which is basically to extend access to the hinterland so that inclusion can improve and so that access, and of course meaningful access, can be something that every African has access to. Because whether we like it or not, in that period of our history as a continent where access is integral to citizens gaining opportunities for many things, new jobs and all of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gbenga. That was very good from the river background. I think it's River Congo here, talking from in DRC. And I think you talked about this universal access funds, and I will go back to Eleanor and I'll put her on the spot because I know they just finished work in Republic of Benin, universal access. They want to do the same in Gambia. From their experience, what do you think universal access funds, how has it benefited vulnerable communities in rural areas you have worked with around the globe?
Thank you very much. The topic of universal service and access funds usually creates a lot of division, because there are people who feel that these funds are not needed. There's a group of, especially some of the contributors to the funds, think that the funds are not needed and the government should just allow them to roll out themselves. But as I said initially, if you leave infrastructure or rollout of telecoms and broadband infrastructure to the companies, they will just go where they can make more money. and therefore rural areas, which where you have people with low incomes, would not be connected. So the universal service funds and access funds in many countries, when we conducted a research in 2018, what we found out that in Africa, there was about $408 million left untapped, sitting down just in universal service funds. And if you want to put it in perspective, that is enough to bring 6 million women online, and it's enough to train about 16 million people on digital skills. So if you consider the amount of money, and this was in 2018, we are yet to do another one this year in 2022, but we did a similar one in Latin America, and the money was in billions, over $7 billion, also sitting either unused or not being used for the right purposes. So what we've observed is that in a lot of countries, there's a law to collect the money. So either it's 1% of the revenue that telcos are making, or sometimes utility companies as well. Like in Senegal, it's not just the telcos to contribute, but utility companies. But then there isn't a law about how to use the money. So there are a lot of countries that are collecting the funds, but there is no law about how to use it. Or there's no administrative setup on how to use the money. And so the funds either, well, when we published this, somebody said we should even check if the money is there at all. That's another thing, another discussion. But the point is that the funds, we need to start checking what's happening to the funds in our various countries. And this is why I keep challenging a lot of, participants, and even in our coalitions, that we should start asking questions about the universal service funds in our various countries. What are they being used for? We should be able to see a published list of projects that are being, that the funds are being used on. I know in Ghana, they have the Ghana Investment Fund for Electronic Communication, and they are, I don't know if their representatives are here. They were here yesterday. But they were, they've been using it as not just providing digital skills and training, but they've also been going into infrastructure deployment. And so they deploy the infrastructure into rural areas, and then the telcos, the rest, all either use or lease the infrastructure that is needed. It's not perfect, but it's just one example. And I think that it's other things that are happening in other countries as well. If in Rwanda, they have used universal service funds to provide training for a lot of women. And so there are ways to be able to use the universal service funds. But the first thing is, do you know where the funds are? Do you know the authority in your country that's supposed to be administering the universal service funds? And how do you get in touch with them? Do they publish what they're doing? I think this is where we have to have a call to action on how to hold universal service funds to account. You mentioned how they're supporting vulnerable groups. There are various ways that some are happening, but as I mentioned, the other challenge we see with universal service funds is we are not seeing data. Even if the data is there, it's not open. So how are we able to tell how many people are being impacted? And that is one of the key problems that we see across the region, that you don't get the data. How many people are being trained, and beyond the training, what happens? So the few countries that have been able to have got open, I know Nigeria also has universal service funds, and they are quite open about it. They have a rule that the funds have to be expended before the year ends. There's a rule, and so they're also forced to use the funds. But we need to check how the funds are being used and how much data is being collected, and challenge the authorities to show how the funds are being dispersed across the board. And I think that's something we should take away from this session.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. And I will go this call to action you talked about. Madam Elliot, you're with the Internet Society here, and you have the A4AI coalition here. You talked about them. During the 2020 to 2021, what do you think in terms of access to vulnerable areas, if you have a universal access fund here, what do you think that fund has done for them? Do you have any data you can provide to Ghanaians sitting down here to say, okay, this is what ISOC saw this is what happened with any tangible examples? Because it's good to have tangible examples to give. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For that fund, we normally get support from ISOC Global. Okay, so during COVID, you know that this discussion is what's really happening post-COVID. Yes. Yes. And there are two main things that is happening, especially with Internet Society Ghana, to increase digital skills. So advocacy, and we've pushed in a lot of things to make sure that different groups all over Ghana, to make sure that the young, especially from the grassroots, the schools, the universities, all these groups get to know that, yes, it is time to go to get online, not just online. You should know what is happening, how can we stay secure, why we should not click just anything is very important. So that is one aspect. Another thing we also embarked on is to look at equity for the disabled, the physically challenged. So that is also another thing, project we undertook to make sure that the technology, if everybody is going online, what about them? Do they have the right technologies? Do they have the training, the kind of skills to even use for these kind of technologies? So that's what we have been doing within this period. Yes, so that's mainly what we have been doing. And for us, you realize that when we deal with the internet, we are interested in the growth, we are interested in the future of the internet, and we also want to make sure that everybody trusts the internet. So looking at this as the mission and the vision, these were the major aspects that we undertook, and that is ongoing and is working very well.
Can you give us a tangible example in one community?
Okay, so we took two communities here in Accra. Right here in Accra, we identified basic schools around, okay, so Legon, we have Legon Village. There are basic schools in that area, very close to University of Ghana. Yet they did not have access to computers right here in Accra. So we identify all these basic schools where we had to go in, even make sure that we install, give the computers, train the teachers, train the students, and then we move on from one. See, that's how we did it. One institution is handled, and then they will recommend that this next institution does not have. And then we move on to that particular school, and we deal with it. That is one. Two, we handle the using hubs as well. The hub system helped us to cover a lot of regions. So we had series of webinars, and we had people, Internet Society members all over the country going in there to help with a practical session. The idea is advocacy. I personally am an educationist. I'm a lecturer at the university. So for knowledge acquisition is a passion. And personally, I'm a lecturer in the IT department. So it's a passion to make sure that everybody has some form of digital skills. Yes, sorry, my passion has to be used to attain that for the country as a whole. So we use the hub system to cover the whole of Ghana, and then we identify specific schools here in Accra and in Tamale in the northern region, and we did that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like the way you used an example from Accra because it's very interesting. Cambridge municipality in the United Kingdom, they did their digital strategy, their current digital strategy, and they discovered that there's a big gap between the haves and the have-nots in Cambridge. Despite the amount of talent in University of Cambridge, despite the amount of companies that have come there to set up, but the average person in Cambridge, the average man, poor of the poor, lacks digital skills. And you will discover that sometimes when we talk about this digital inclusion and access, we are talking of our rural communities, but with what we now have a lot of people living in urban areas in Africa, a lot of our schools we pass by in our respective cities, you discover a lot of our public schools, they don't even have internet. Even I can remember I was talking to an old boy of a high school in the Gambia, and he didn't even know that his former alumni in the capital city, internet was on and off in the school, and students could not get access, you know. So these are some of the things that even in our environment, whether we are in Lagos, whether we are in Abidjan, whether we are in Burkina Faso, we might be passing a public school next to us, or a hospital, and we'll discover there's, I mean, through our own advocacy and through our own initiatives, we can do something about it, you know. So I will come back to Mr. Traore. I want us to look at those vulnerable areas. Costs is something in these displaced people, because the example, I would like to see what your agency has done personally in terms of cost, in terms of providing digital skills to people in the north that are being affected, and how you have been able to include them in any digital agenda of your agency.
Merci, Poncelet. Avant de venir à la question sur les personnes vulnérables, il faudrait juste peut-être partager un peu l'expérience du Burkina aussi en matière de gestion, d'utilisation des ressources du Fonds de services universels, et qui est aujourd'hui en fait un mécanisme très important pour promouvoir l'accès et l'inclusion. Donc au Burkina, on a pu faire des progrès ces dernières années quant à l'utilisation de ces ressources-là. Et justement, l'avènement de la COVID-19 a boosté un peu le dynamisme dans l'utilisation de ces ressources. Ce qu'on a pu faire, le fonds au Burkina fonctionne avec un conseil d'administration qui a élaboré une stratégie pour les services universels. Et à l'issue de cette stratégie, il y a un certain nombre de projets qu'on a commencé à mettre en place. Et je vais parler juste de deux projets phares qui sont en cours, qui ont commencé à produire des résultats. C'est dans le domaine de l'éducation et de la santé. Au niveau de l'éducation, le fonds a commencé à financer le projet qu'on a appelé un étudiant, un ordinateur, qui permet à chaque étudiant qui est inscrit à l'université de pouvoir accéder à un ordinateur pour justement mieux travailler et mieux s'éduquer sur le plan du digital. Donc ça, c'est un projet qui est en cours, et on a déjà près de 20 000 à 30 000 étudiants qui ont pu bénéficier de cet accompagnement-là. Donc ça, c'est une action concrète du Fonds de services universels. Et nous travaillons aussi avec ce fonds dans le cadre d'un projet d'interconnexion de toutes les universités publiques au Burkina Faso. Donc on est parti sur un projet pilote de 17 sites, donc, incluant des universités et des centres de recherche. Donc l'idée, c'est de créer un réseau local interconnecté par fibre optique entre ces universités, qui leur permettent de pouvoir échanger du contenu, échanger des connaissances sans passer par Internet. Donc ça, c'est un projet qui est en cours et qui devrait s'achever bientôt. L'objectif, c'est d'aller jusqu'à 81 sites, mais pour le moment, nous travaillons sur 17 sites, et l'objectif, c'est de finir cette interconnexion en décembre. Donc cela va permettre de booster l'éducation en ligne et les cours en ligne pour permettre aux universités d'échanger des contenus. L'autre projet phare dans le domaine qu'on a pu mettre en place grâce au Fonds de services universels, c'est l'interconnexion des centres de santé. Donc là également, c'est notre agence qui est en train de mettre ça en place. Donc on est parti sur une dizaine de centres de santé, des hôpitaux publics et d'autres centres secondaires, pour les mettre aussi en réseau. Donc tous ces centres seront reliés par fibre optique. Donc ce projet est pratiquement fini, on est à près de 80 à 90% d'exécution. Donc cela va permettre à ces différents centres de pouvoir rester dans le même réseau privé et virtuel qui est créé au sein du réseau national de l'administration. Donc ça permet des interventions en ligne, des échanges de connaissances, des échanges de contenu. Voilà. Et l'objectif aussi, à partir de cette phase pilote, c'est de pouvoir l'étendre à tous les centres de santé à l'échelle nationale. Donc Et dans le cadre de projet e-santé, cela va permettre aux médecins de la capitale de pouvoir assister d'autres médecins dans les zones les plus reculées pour certains types d'interventions. Donc ça, c'est des actions concrètes qu'on a pu mettre en place grâce au financement des fonds de services universels. Et actuellement, on est en train de monter un autre projet sur le monde rural pour étendre le réseau national d'administration et dans certains chefs-lieux de communes et départements au niveau rural pour permettre le déploiement des services. Donc voilà un peu ce qu'on a fait en termes d'exemples concrets d'utilisation du Fonds de services universels au Burkina. Maintenant, pour revenir à la question des personnes vulnérables, ça c'est un phénomène assez récent que nous avons dû faire face ces dernières années à la faveur de la montée de l'insécurité. Donc aujourd'hui, nous sommes à peu près à 2 millions et quelques de personnes déplacées internes au Burkina sur une population de 20 millions. Donc les statistiques, c'est une personne sur 10 est déplacée interne aujourd'hui. Donc c'est un phénomène assez grave au niveau du Burkina. Et ces déplacés internes sont installés souvent dans des camps de fortune. Et toute la difficulté, c'est comment justement les faire bénéficier d'un certain nombre de services sociaux d'urgence. Voilà. Et là, le numérique est en train de beaucoup nous aider pour pouvoir justement répondre à ces urgences-là. Déjà, la partie possibilité de cash transfert. Voilà. Donc, à partir des recensements de ces personnes, il y a des cartes d'indigents qui sont délivrées et cela permet à partir de ces numéros-là de pouvoir faire des cash transferts pour faire face aux besoins urgents. Mais il y a la question aussi de l'éducation des enfants en situation d'urgence. Voilà. Donc, il y a des programmes qu'il faut pouvoir déployer, des programmes d'enseignement adaptés à des déplacés internes. Et là également, le numérique est envisagé comme une solution qui doit pouvoir y contribuer. Donc, je veux dire, c'est maintenant vraiment, on est en plein dans la réflexion sur justement comment faire face à ces besoins urgents. Et la dimension numérique est beaucoup aussi en ligne de mire parce que ça va nous permettre de pouvoir accélérer la résolution de ces problèmes-là et l'accès et l'inclusion digitale de ces personnes déplacées internes-là. Donc ça, c'est des initiatives vraiment qui sont en pleine réflexion actuellement. Et ce que je peux dire en lien avec les personnes vulnérables. Parce que ces personnes qui sont déjà dans ces situations-là, on doit rapidement travailler à ne pas les laisser de côté. Et l'inclusion sociale de ces personnes est une des priorités. Et le numérique permettra d'accélérer ce processus-là. Merci.
Thank you very much, Inoussa. That number really touched me. 2 million people internally displaced. That's the population of the Gambia. And so you can just imagine the magnanimity in what you people are doing. So your 81 centers you're creating, those digital centers you're creating through your digital sites, I hope when we'll be meeting next year, you'll be able to tell us that some of these have benefited those vulnerable communities, because this internally displaced, if we check with the data from the Lake Chad Basin alone, we are going close to 10 million. I know about this because I recently redeveloped their website for that basin. So you discover that in West Africa, we are talking of close to 15 million about that. And all these people are part of this digital, they have to be digitally included, they have to have access because they are our children, they are our mothers, they are our grandmothers that need access in one way or the other. I'll go back to Mr. Gbenga Sesan. We have seen that within this digital inclusion program, one of the good things that has happened is that our medical data, when in terms of what we have seen in this pandemic, we have been able to collect them better in a way. People thought we will collapse, I remember Nena saying a word yesterday, and it really touched me that people thought, okay, with COVID, how will we do as a region, as a continent? And we've really done well, and it's just, I think we learned a lot of lessons personally from Ebola. But how do you see, in terms of accessing public health information, in terms of the COVID, how do you think it can be better? How do you think this has been a learning lesson in terms of accessing certain data for citizens in the work you do?
Okay, I mean, I've missed part of your question. My apologies, this access, but I got the part about how we could do better with COVID. And like I said earlier, one thing that is very clear, and I will just turn the video just in case that will improve the communication right now. One of the things I mentioned earlier, we're still within the pandemic. It's not yet over, but the lessons we learned, particularly during the lockdown, we did well. We did well in the sense that many countries focused on inclusion, on making sure that access was provided. People went as far as using radio, TV, and all that to provide education. But I think that we backslid too fast. COVID isn't even over yet, and we're beginning to de-emphasize access. It's funny because we prioritized laws, around data collection, and those data collection laws are still in place. It's like the new normal, but we seem to have now deprioritized, access. What we have learned from our work is that it's not even as much as it's not even as much of what government places. Government just needs to get out of the way. We have communities that have deliberately gone ahead to provide access. And I think that a lot of people have spoken to the issue of community access on this panel. People have gone ahead to provide access for themselves. But the way that government has stood in their way is that they haven't issued licenses. So basically what they're doing is literally illegal. If you look across many African countries where power supply is a problem, people generate their own power. I had to install solar, panels in my house to be able to stay and have power to be able to do the in their way, because they have refused to provide affordable. And I'm saying this as affordable, not just community licenses, but affordable community network licenses, because it is of their way to do the work that government emphasize, a point, that was, raised as a question by Olivier in terms of context and content. Much of the conversation we're having is in English and in French. One of the things that as an organization, Pride Initiative decided to do beginning from last year and early last year is to make sure that our conversations are also made in the local languages where the work is being done. For example, if you've noticed, all of our reports, by the way, are available in English, French, and Swahili. And in some cases, you will find videos available in Hausa. You will find content available in
We have lost you. We got your point. We understand. We understand the situation where you are in Congo DR. And I hope you will come back to conclude and to take questions. So let us see whether you come back. And we are just top of the hour. I will allow my panelists. I will start with Inoussa TRAORE first to come up with what do you think, especially looking at we have 3 landlocked countries in West Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. What do you think in terms of digital inclusion and access can be done better for you people? And do you think all the submarine cables that have come into your country via cables coming from whether it's Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana, do you think they are well protected? Do you think that infrastructure, with all the insurgency around, do you think your infrastructure is well protected? And any last comments you'd like to say, Inoussa?
Ok. Merci, Poncelet. Donc, pour les pays de l'Interland qui n'ont pas directement accès à la mer, comme le Burkina, le Mali et le Niger, je pense qu'il y a eu beaucoup de progrès ces dernières années. Et quand je prends le cas du Burkina, on a réussi à mettre en place ce qu'on appelle les points d'atterrissement virtuels. Donc, depuis la mise en place opérationnelle de ces paves-là, on a ressenti automatiquement une réduction significative des coûts d'accès à l'Internet, spécialement l'Internet mobile. Donc, parce que désormais, la plupart des opérateurs arrivent à acheter cette connectivité moins chère au niveau de ces points d'atterrissement virtuels. Et donc, cette mutualisation dans l'approvisionnement du pays en capacité a eu pour conséquence immédiate une réduction des coûts, et cela a amélioré l'accessibilité financière des populations aux services mobiles. Donc ça, c'est quelque chose qui est très important, et je pense que tous les pays dans la même situation gagneraient à y aller vers ce type de solutions mutualisées pour avoir un impact sur l'accès et l'abordabilité de ces services-là. Également, il y a le maillage du territoire. Parce qu'une chose est d'avoir en fait cette connectivité-là, mais au-delà de la connectivité que l'on prend à l'international, pour chaque pays, dans une perspective de souveraineté numérique, il est important de pouvoir construire des backbones nationaux en matière de télécommunications, ce qui permet justement aux différentes entités du pays de pouvoir être interconnectées, indépendamment même de la connexion à l'Internet au niveau mondial. Donc, au Burkina, on a réussi à mettre en place plusieurs kilomètres, je pense qu'on en parle de 3000 à 4000 kilomètres de fibres optiques pour relier les différentes provinces, et près de 1000 kilomètres en métropolitain pour interconnecter les différents bâtiments administratifs, les différents services. Cela permet l'accès aux services, et on a comme une sorte d'intranet national qui permet justement aux différentes entités, et notre agence, justement, son rôle, c'est de pouvoir assurer la gestion, la maintenance, la sécurisation de cette infrastructure-là, mais aussi son extension pour permettre justement un maillage du territoire le plus large possible avec ce réseau de fibres optiques. Cela permet ensuite aux différentes couches, la e-administration, par exemple les services des impôts, les services des finances, l'éducation, la santé, de pouvoir déployer plusieurs services. Et aujourd'hui, justement, on a plusieurs projets de transformation digitale qui vont reposer sur cette infrastructure-là et qui fonctionnent indépendamment, j'allais dire, de l'Internet mondial, puisque c'est un réseau national. Et justement, avec les points d'atterrissement virtuels et la connexion qu'on prend via le Ghana et la Côte d'Ivoire, le pays est connecté à ces câbles sous-marins, et on a ressenti effectivement qu'il y a une diminution des coûts. Donc, la perspective serait de renforcer ces points d'atterrissement virtuels pour augmenter la capacité, puisque la demande est de plus en plus croissante, et aussi agir peut-être au niveau, là où je vois qu'on peut encore faire mieux, c'est le côté régulation, parce qu'on a le sentiment, sans avoir des données chiffrées, on a le sentiment que les coûts peuvent être encore plus faibles. Donc les opérateurs peuvent faire encore mieux. Donc les régulateurs peuvent regarder davantage pour voir comment effectivement les coûts peuvent être encore moindres. Donc voilà comment des pays, en tout cas enclavés, peuvent facilement contourner justement cette barrière-là et en mutualisant l'approvisionnement du pays et en permettant aux opérateurs déjà d'acheter la connectivité à un coût moins cher et de pouvoir le revendre aux populations à un prix encore plus abordable. Donc voilà un peu ce qui peut être fait. Merci.
Thank you very much. I will now hand over to Madam Elliot for your closing statements, and especially I would like to see, when you look at the United Nations Secretary General Digital Cooperation Roadmap in terms of digital inclusion and in terms of connectivity, which leads to access, those two part of those action plans, how do you relate it to your work in the Internet Society, in what you do in trying to bridge those gaps that exist in terms of...
Thank you. But I would like to give one or two, tell you one or two things we have been doing before I go through that. For the past 4 weeks, we've been having this interesting training in collaboration with NetHope. And this is about disaster emergency response. And the idea is to have this great team in Africa when there's any disaster. Because over time, when we have weather disaster by land, we don't have Africa, we don't have hurricanes. But when there are wars, when there's flood, any kind of disaster, over time it was realized that when it happens, the first thing the people who are displaced want is communication. Hence, we need that team that will be able to make sure we have communication. So we've had this training for the past 4 weeks. It ended on Wednesday. And we had people from all over Africa, Kenya, Senegal. We've trained these people. Now we have this formidable team that will be deployed anywhere in Africa in case there's disaster. And this is telecommunication. And we are proud of that as Internet Society Ghana chapter. Yes. So for us to deal with access, we are looking at it from different levels. And to bridge that digital divide, Internet Society's major role is to liaise with government, the technical community, the society, all our stakeholders. Our stakeholders are many. But we are doing our best to make sure that we at least solve one issue at a time. And within this period, we've dealt with emergency response. Within this period, we are increasing digital literacy. Within this period, we are increasing equity and involving the physically challenged persons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Elliot. I will go to Gbenga and I will end with Eleanor. And Gbenga, are you online? If you're there from the banks of the River Congo, let us know. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. It looks as if...
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, okay, we can hear you. So it would be great for you, from that nice view you have, for you to give a closing remark. Africa moving forward, West Africa centric. What do you think
All
we can
right.
do better with digital inclusion and access?
Okay. Thank you so much. From Lake Kivu, in Goma, I think my closing thoughts will be around two things. One is to commend all the stakeholders who have ensured that digital inclusion and access are promoted on the continent, from every country within West Africa and beyond. Your efforts are not going unnoticed. But secondly is to say that the IGF is an opportunity for us, since it's a multi-stakeholder discussion, for us to leave this room to decide that by the time we get to the Africa IGF in July, and by the time we get to the main IGF in November into December, we're not going to be having the same discussions and talking about the same problems, but we'll be discussing solutions and celebrating our successes. Viva Africa.
Well, thank you from Lake Kivu. Thank you, Gbenga. I will now hand Eleanor for the closing statements, and then we'll take questions. First, we'll give our online participants for the first questions, and we'll take couple, I will allow the technical team out here to guide on that. Eleanor.
How do I top that after Gbenga's wonderful submission? But I'm going to try. So I think that for us to look at digital inclusion in a way, what's the cost of excluding people from the digital economy? And I think this is one area that I'm very proud of A4AI, the research that we're able to carry out on the cost of excluding women from the digital economy. In fact, what we found out that in the last 10 years, we've lost over $1 trillion. Think about it. $1 trillion has been lost because women have been excluded from the digital economy. And just coming to West Africa alone, when we use our model, last year, 2020, we're in 2022. So in 2020, we found that 7 West African countries missed out on a collective 18.4 billion GDP in 2020. So if you think about what $18.4 billion could do, just think about the fact that a lot of people have been excluded from the digital economy. So we can't talk about inclusion without putting a cost to the exclusion. And that is one of the key things. We need the data. We need to find out where the gaps are. And then the second thing we need to do is we need to be more involved in the policy development process. I can't stress that enough. That's one area that I'm very proud of A4AI, that we've been bringing this multi-stakeholder coalition together, made up of civil society, private sector, government, academia, to talk about policy reforms. Because it starts from reforms. It starts from identifying where the pain points are and then finding a solution to that collectively. So I really encourage you to be a part of whichever process, from ISOC, A4AI, from the IGF. You need to be part of the policy development process, because that's where we can effect the change from the policy level, and where we can also share examples and also identify where the gaps are and celebrate our successes. So it's possible. I think Africa has shown through the COVID that if we really put our heart to it, and we are really determined, we can be able to bring down the potential casualties. And the same way, if we are able to really resolve to bring ourselves together and identify where the gaps are, we can also make a very big difference in contributing to the global GDP.
Thank you very much. I think everybody has really done justice to this topic. There's more to talk about, but I think in celebrating our successes, what I will end before we start taking these questions is, we have the West African Internet Governance Forum is part of the NRI, that's the National, Regional, and Initiatives of the Global IGF. Recently, we have been told to share our stories and everything. I think some of the stories you have here, you share it with the Secretariat. Let us publish our work on our website, on the Global IGF, what we do, our successes we celebrate in terms of digital inclusion, in terms of access. These are examples, these are best practices in terms of policy work. We should, as much as possible, when we have a coalition like A4AI, go there and read. Learn what they are doing. I will encourage the young people, those in academics like Madam Elliot, share those links with your students, because sometimes they say we are good at writing policy, but we can't implement. Reading all these good documents can also help us in our implementation processes. So I thank the panelists very much, and we will take questions before we round up. Please, questions. Okay, there's a question at the back. Okay, please go ahead. Yes. Yeah, Dr. Kosi.
Merci à l'ensemble de nos panélistes et aux modérateurs. Je voudrais faire un commentaire pas une question. Les gouvernements ont besoin d'avancer au même titre que le secteur privé et la société civile. Mais on avance mieux quand il y a des chiffres. Donc la recherche doit être au centre de toutes les initiatives que nous sommes en train de conduire. On n'a pas toujours des ressources au niveau du gouvernement pour financer la recherche. Mais les organisations qui veulent nous aider pour que la décision publique soit vite prise gagneraient à financer les actions de recherche qui nous permettent de dire avec précision si nous diminuons ou nous agissons sur tel ou tel maillon, nous pouvions avoir les coûts d'accès à Internet à tel franc pour nos populations. Par exemple, avec la synergie interréseau, c'est une méthodologie d'approche de mise en place des infrastructures réseau. Il n'est pas concevable que 3 opérateurs sur le même canal puissent avoir de la fibre. Ce n'est pas rationnel. On devrait autoriser au maximum 2 opérateurs, quitte à ce que les infrastructures de ces 2 opérateurs puissent être mutualisées par l'ensemble des autres acteurs qui sont demandés. De demande d'infrastructure, ne regardons pas seulement la demande finale orientée vers l'utilisateur, mais regardons la demande dans le service aux citoyens. Tout ce qui est santé, tout ce qui est éducation, tout ce qui est service économique devrait pouvoir utiliser un canal unique avec un backup exploitable par tous et cela réduit significativement le coût. Les recherches sur la synergie interréseau ont montré qu'on peut avoir des économies jusqu'à hauteur de 40% du coût global de l'accès à la ressource Internet. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks. That was a very good comment, Dr. Kosi from Benin. And please, we have someone here at the back.
Okay, I'm Emmanuel Ajimabedu, a former membership chair, ISOC. I'll talk about ISOC and also some other things. I'm sharing an experience or experiences that is going on. After COVID, my church, I'm Adventist, SDA Church. After COVID. Before COVID, people were not inclined to, they were not using Facebook and the medias very much as after COVID. Now my church, it seems all the churches in Ghana are having Facebook handle, where live church service are being telecast. So those who are not able to come to church, maybe in the house, then they will be listening. This has forced those who are not even into IT, those who don't have the skills, to learn the skills so that when they are in the house, they can listen to church service. So that is what is going on. Last week we did a crusade, and we did it online. And we've advised all the churches to acquire satellite decks. So now, we did this crusade last week at Medina, but it was broadcast, it was shown throughout the whole world. We were receiving calls from Kenya, from US, from London, Brazil. They were all listening to the crusade. So that is what post-COVID or after COVID, what is happening in Ghana in some of the churches. And what the church also did is we organized the youth. We brought them to Accra. We trained them on how to use projector, how to do this, how to do this. So now it's like the skills are being shared even to the remote areas within the church. So as we are going, those who are involved in church service or Islam or whatever, we should try to also sensitize them or help so that we can also use that channel to carry our cause on. Then talking to ISOC, some years back we opened, when I was in charge, we were trying to identify some local communities. So a place like Ejeso in Asante region, we opened a center called Community Development Center. We ran it for about 3 years. We trained the youth, the old men and women. We trained them in ICT. We acquired a whole office. I was in charge, so I used to be going to monitor it. We trained the youth. So when we got to know that people have acquired enough skills, we closed because of funds. We closed it, then we carried it on. We tried to open center chapters in all universities in Ghana. So we connected Cape Coast, we connected Ghana Telecom, we connected Valley View, we connected Legon. Then we were trying to have a project for final year students, computer science students, their project work. We were trying to organize some competition for them. I don't know, this is a model that we can also carry out when we go. The telcos will support. They are ready to sponsor. So this is an experience that I want us to share. So ISOC has been doing a lot in Ghana. Even though no money, but members try to volunteer with our own resources.
Thank you very much for that comment and that examples you gave. Yes, online please. Do we have any questions online? Any questions online? Okay. Thank you very much. I wish to thank my panelists here, Eleanor from A4AI, Dr. Inoussa, and Dr. Elliot, and also Gbenga Sesan, who joined us remotely. It's been very interesting. Let us keep the discussions. Let us do what we can. That last comment about community initiatives, what you can do. I think a lot of organizations have had social media handles. Even my church, I watch services online now, my local Catholic church. So I think we can also use that in education. We can use that in health. Our politicians too are using a lot of TikTok nowadays. So let us do well with it in terms of providing access for those that are vulnerable and those that are in need. I thank you very all, and we head into the next session. The moderator, Mr. Joshua, thank you.
Yes, so they'll take a picture while I keep talking. Thank you so much for joining this section. Thanks so much to the moderator and the panelists and those online. We will be moving to have a tea break. You just need to pass through this door and there's a tea break aside. And after the tea break, we come back to have a conversation about West African input to the Global Digital Compact. It's going to be a workshop section, an interactive section. We're going to speak within ourselves back and forth. And we also have the UN Tech Envoy speaking to us also. So just take the next 10 minutes to have the tea and we're back by 12. And if you're not here by 12, as I did yesterday, we'll still start, you know. And you have to go online to read, look at the recordings and follow up. Thank you so much, and the tea breaks are outside. Grateful.